Hi, everyone. We're still on the respiratory system. It's Dr. Lindner. So let's take a look at the bronchial tree. So we have primary bronchi, secondary bronchi, and tertiary bronchi. The secondary bronchi are known as lobar bronchi, and the tertiary bronchi are segmental. So if we think back to the trachea, then you had that carina with the bifurcation. We then have the primary bronchi. And the primary bronchi are going to branch to form the secondary bronchi. Now, one secondary bronchus is going to enter each lobe. Then we have the secondary bronchi, also known as lobar bronchi. Now, keep in mind that the right lung is going to have 3 lobes, and the left lung is going to have 2 lobes. The right lung is going to have 3 secondary bronchi, and the left lung will have 2 secondary bronchi. So think of each of the secondary bronchi are going to enter each lobe. So since the right lung has 3 lobes, and the left lung has 2, it only makes sense that the right lung will have 3 secondary bronchi, and the left lung will have 2 secondary bronchi. Now they're going to branch to form the tertiary bronchi, and the tertiary bronchi are known as the segmental bronchi. Those will further divide into bronchioles, and each one of them will form about 6,500 terminal bronchioles. So if we look at the terminal bronchioles, keep in mind that that's the last part of the conducting pathway. They're going to supply the pulmonary lobules, and they're going to branch to form the respiratory bronchial. So that respiratory bronchial is now that first portion or the first segment of the respiratory zone. And that respiratory zone is primarily where the gas exchange is going to take place. They have alveoli in their walls, and they will divide into alveolar ducts. So to review the conducting zone, you've got the trachea, which divide into a primary bronchi, secondary bronchi, tertiary bronchi, bronchioles, and will end at the terminal bronchioles. That's the end of the conducting zone. The terminal bronchioles give rise to the respiratory bronchioles, which is really the first part of the respiratory zone. The respiratory bronchioles they'll be leading into the alveolar ducts, and those ducts open up into an alveolar sac, and then the alveolar sac into the alveoli. So here is another picture showing the trachea. Here's the carina. Here's the right primary, and then the left primary bronchus. And that the primary then leads into a secondary bronchus. And the secondary bronchus lead into tertiaries. And the tertiaries lead into bronchioles. And then the bronchioles lead into the terminal bronchial, and that's the end of the conducting zone. Then it leads into the respiratory bronchial down here, which leads into the alveolar portion. So if we look and we blow that section up, here's a terminal bronchial. And once we move distal to that, we have a respiratory bronchial. The respiratory bronchial, we'll see if we follow this, leads into the alveolar duct. And then the alveolar duct leads into this alveolar sac. Each of these here, this is an alveoli. Each of these are an alveoli. Okay, this entire thing is an alveolar sac. Okay. Okay, let's take a look at the alveolus, or the air sacs. These are the structures within the lung that actually affects that gas exchange between the blood and the environment. And there's different types of cells that make up the alveolus. So septal 1 or type 1 septal cell, that's primarily involved with the gas exchange. And that's between the gas exchange between the lung and the blood. And type 2 septal cell, this is really important. This secretes surfactant. And surfactant's purpose is to really decrease the surface tension of water and fluids in the lungs, and it prevents something called atelectasis. Think of what would happen if you had, let's say, a slide, a glass slide that you were to put under a microscope, and you just put a water droplet on there. And then you take a clear glass cover on top of that water droplet, then it sticks to the slide. And if you try and take that glass off the slide, you couldn't. But if you put a little drop of soap, you decrease that surface tension between the water and the surface, and it slides back and forth. It prevents the stickiness. That's what surfactant does. Okay. And the third type, these are called alveolar macrophages. Those are involved in assisting with immunity of the lungs. Okay, we'll take a break here. When we come back, we'll talk about a few respiratory diseases.